Hey, what's up guys, Metal571 here, and today I want to talk about the Sennheiser HD380 Pro. Now, these headphones are intended for professional monitoring use generally, but they get paired up pretty often in terms of head-to-head versus the M50X. So I thought I'd review this pair. I originally was loaned this from somebody back on when I was on Reddit more, and I just bought it because I liked it so much. I now use it as my office headphone, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So the build quality on these now, they are made of plastic. There's lots of plastic, but it definitely feels like that the band here that holds the headband together is pretty tough, and it seems to be made of metal. So it's not all plastic, at least, but it's not perfect. Like, for example, the L indicator over here came off randomly. I really don't know where that went. So, it's not perfect. But, so be careful with throwing them around or leaving them in a bag. You never know. You might lose small stuff. I mean, that's nothing big. Nothing major has happened to them otherwise. And I've beat them around a bit. So the other feature you got with this guy is a removable cable. Now, it doesn't remove. It was funny when I first go to remove it. You try to pull it like this, obviously, but no, you actually have to slide this guy to the side, and that's how it works. So the hole is like in there. I know that's what she said, but you plug this in this way, sort of like sideways, and then that's how it works. So you have a coiled cable with this guy, also pretty long, so obviously unless you replace I haven't looked into it, but there might be some 380 compatible third-party cables you could use with this guy, but as it's given to you, this is definitely not a portable headphone unless somehow you kind of coil this coiled already cable up and stick it in your pocket or whatnot. But I wouldn't recommend it. It's really a professional headphone, or an at-desk kind of headphone for an audiophile. So now comfort is really good. Unlike the 280, this is the model up from the 280, which I guess somehow I haven't reviewed that either. That's a really popular headphone among a lot of people. But this is a big step up in sound, which I'll get to in a little bit. From the 280, but it's also a big step up in comfort. So Sennheiser has a really tight-fitting 280 Pro model, and this guy's got just the largest ear cups I think I've ever seen, at least oval on like any headphone. They are ridiculously huge, so they fit really well, and they don't clamp as hard. Now they do clamp, but they don't clamp anywhere near as hard as the 280s, but they still manage to stay on nicely. And they're pretty comfortable. This material doesn't really feel sticky or uncomfortable over long periods of time, which is nice. It breathes better than some flat, annoying pads like the ones AKG was using on the on the 240 and 271. So these are a lot better than that, but they're still not high-end leather or anything like that. It's still like pleather, and pleather headband here too, which I haven't had any problems with either. So comfort-wise, these are quite a big step up from the 280s, and build quality wise I'd say a little bit better as well. Plus you get that removable cable option, which is nice. And of course, just in case I need to mention this is a professional headphone. You get the screw-on 1/4-inch adapter. It's not on here right now, but it's in the box, and screws right onto here for 1/4-inch usage, such as with high-end headphone amps, hi-fi system, receivers, and mixing boards, stuff like that. Alright, so the bass on these. The bass is hard-hitting. It really reminds you of a DT770. That was the first thing I thought of when I listened to these, although they are a little different, quite a bit different actually in the mids and treble, but I'll get to that in a second. The bass goes very deep. It hits really hard. There's definitely a lift in the sub bass. So these are not a punchy bass, but it's really like a deep, powerful bass. Very similar to the DT770 80 ohm. Which I reviewed previously. So if you're a bass head, these are pretty good for that kind of thing. However, as the bass goes up, you get this dip, and that's kind of weird in 300, 400 hertz, and it kind of sounds like it sucks out the life of like some guitars and the lower notes of the middle voice, that kind of thing. So there's a bit missing there that you can fix, thankfully, with some EQ. But, as it is, if you just put these on straight out of the box, you're going to notice kind of this is definitely a V-shaped headphone overall. So you've got a lift in the sub bass, and then it kind of goes down as it goes to the upper bass there. For the mids are kind of weird. This is one of the few headphones where I say the mids aren't really uncolored. There's something going on with them. And it's pretty interesting. So I think I'll link it in the description, but if you look at the golden ears graph, you'll notice that at about 2.5K and at about 4K you've got some spikes, and there's this weird dip at 3K in between them. So instead of like what you'd want to see is a 3.5K peak and just a smooth peak and then back down and then into the treble, you end up with this weird like squiggle in the upper mids. And when you listen to like metal, obviously I listen to that. If you listen to some metal, you'd find the guitar is pretty harsh and somewhat slightly off timbre as well, a little bit weird sounding, and that's why. So you need a kind of a slightly odd corrective EQ that pulls down those two localized spikes in the upper mids, and then you get a more accurate sound. But it's still a little off, but it doesn't bother me once it's EQ'd out as much. But what does bother me more is that this is a closed headphone. There's a lot of isolation and they're great for the office, but again, you're going to run into grain. You're going to run into the usual closed headphone problems with grain, and you're going to run into the problems with speed that you don't get as much of with open back headphones like my holy grail HD600, which of course I still have. So you're not going to get quite that level of refinement. It's not bad, but as you turn up the volume, it gets kind of just too crispy and shoved together, kind of rough sounding. Even after EQ, if you turn it up enough, it'll just sound rough. And I notice it more at high volumes, but that's basically what I'm talking about. They just don't sound as separated. The frequencies are not as distinct and clear, and instrument separation suffers a bit in some songs as a result. So you do have to mess with the mids a little bit, other than the weirdness in the upper mids. Otherwise they're reasonably decent, except for the speed problems that you run into. Oh, sorry, airplane. For the treble, it's slightly dark, although I find there to be a very slight peak at 10K that I pulled down just a bit, just like 2 dB or something. The treble extension is not bad, but it's also, again, less refined and grainier than you'll find in some other headphones, especially open back ones. So that's how the bass mids and treble sound. So overall you get this V shape. You get powerful sub bass. You get this somewhat aggressive, pretty aggressive upper mids that's slightly off timbre, and you have a tiny peak at 10K. But overall the treble is kind of overshadowed by if the music has a lot of upper mids in it. And at sub bass, it's like exploding amounts of that stuff. If you already have a lot in the master of the song you're listening to, it will emphasize that even more. So for the Soundstage, again, pretty good. The 280 and the M50X are way more closed sounding than this, but this is not as wide of a soundstage or accurate as a soundstage sounding as even like my 271, which I actually repurchased. I made a video about that a long time ago where I really didn't like it. After I repurchased it and EQ'd it, I realized it was probably pretty decent. But anyway, that's another story. They're not quite as good as some other. Basically, it's kind of in the middle. It's not an M50 in terms of soundstage width, but it's not a 271 or some high or a biodynamic in terms of soundstage width either. It's somewhere in between, which is still pretty good because this is probably the best what I would consider high isolation type headphone, in that when you put it on in the office, it blocks huge amounts of sound. Not quite as much as the 280, but it sounds a lot better than the 280. It sounds less grainy than the 280. It actually has a soundstage unlike the 280. It has better treble extension than the 280. Less uneven bass, although it's still a little bit uneven, than the 280. All those things. So definitely worth an upgrade. But again, those mids are going to bother you if you don't EQ them and you like to listen loud and you like to listen to metal. It's just really harsh, at least to my ears. Other genres may not bother you so much. So that's the HD380 Pro. It's been a long time coming, this review. Obviously, some notes for the long time subscribers. A long time subscriber. I have moved. Yes, this is the new place. Thankfully, I am not in range of a loud refrigerator anymore. I have central air and heat, so you don't have to listen to that crap. This mic, actually, I forgot to move the mic back it's been a long time since I made a video. It's still sitting in front of my keyboard here, but I think it'll sound pretty good. And yeah, excuse my voice a little bit here. I have kind of a slightly sore throat that came out absolutely nowhere. Otherwise, I feel fine. So, I'm not dead, and there's your HD380 Pro review. So feel free to, once again, comment, like, subscribe, all the usual things. And I'll answer, as I usually do, as many comments as I can about the headphones if you have any further questions. And that's about it. Thanks, guys, and see you in the next one.